In this video, we're going to be reviewing the Mossberg Maverick 88 12-gauge shotgun. Over the past few decades, there's been a lot of very affordable firearms coming onto the market, ranging from handguns, bolt-action rifles, and shotguns. Lately, many of the Turkish variants made by Akkar have hit the market under a number of brand names. My favorite, of course, of these is the CZ612 shown here, which basically is an 870 action variant and is an amazing value for a lower budget self-defense shotgun. But Turkey was not the first to start producing low-cost shotguns. In fact, a lot of this started back in 1988 at a border town in West Texas that continues to be as popular today as it was 25 years ago. The Maverick 88 12-gauge shotgun started production in 1988, hence how it's got its name, along with Eagle Pass, where it's produced, is located in Maverick County, Texas. The Maverick 88 is basically a less expensive version of the Mossberg 500, which is one of the most popular pump shotguns of all time. The major differences between the 500 and the Maverick are a trigger guard that has a cross-mounted bolt safety as opposed to a traditional tang safety that you would see on a 500. There's also a simple blue steel bluing versus a parkerized finish. And although it is assembled in Texas, a number of the parts are built in other countries, namely Mexico, to help keep the cost down. Today, Maverick is owned by Mossberg, and the majority of Mossberg's manufacturing has also moved down to Eagle Pass, thanks in large part to the continued migration of gun companies out of hostile blue states. So on the table today, what you see is the version that I bought, the combination version, which is the security model with the 18.5-inch barrel, along with the 28-inch field barrel that you can easily swap in and out. The field barrel comes with a standard interchangeable modified choke. So modified chokes are basically the second tightest groups you can shoot compared to a full choke. They're great for trap and waterfowl and turkey. Many hunters consider it the best all-around choke for medium range shooting, and it's most commonly used by most shooters today. But the good news is you can easily change out these chokes for any other type of 500 chokes that you wish to run. Now, one of the first things you're going to do, that most people do when they get the Mossberg 88, is they remove this, what's called a two-shot magazine plug. And basically all you have to do is you unscrew the cap here and then remove the barrel. And then at that point, what you want to do is you want to have the shotgun facing down. There's a small hole here on the tube, and then you shake it, and this will basically drop out. And that'll allow you to get your shotgun to full capacity, which is 5+1, or 5 in the tube and 1 in the chamber. Now, one of the first things you're going to notice about the Mossberg 88 is its weight. It's a very lightweight shotgun. It comes in at 6¼ pounds. The reason why it does this is, first off, it uses an aluminum receiver, which you're going to typically see with a lot of lower cost shotguns today. One of the ways you can check if it's not obvious is, and I don't know if you can see this on the video, but sometimes if you run a light over, for example, the steel that's blued, you can see it's pretty much blue, but then you run it over the receiver, and again, I don't know how well this shows up in camera, but oftentimes it'll show kind of a purple or a blue hue, and that's an easy way without using just a magnet to check and see if the receiver is aluminum. But they do utilize a lighter weight aluminum receiver. They also have a thin-walled barrel. They have a polymer stock as well as a polymer trigger housing. Now, all of this makes for a very lightweight shotgun, but that also means, because of physics, it also has a higher felt recoil. It is certainly more pronounced than a lot of other shotguns you shoot. This is why I recommend, especially for casual shooters, that when you shoot shotguns that are under 7 pounds, to start shooting lower recoil slugs and buckshot loads. So here are some examples that I like to use. For example, the True Ball has low recoils. Remington makes a slugger managed recoil loads. And then you can also get these with buckshot. And many of these recoil loads, these reduced recoil loads, come in at around 1,200 to 1,300 feet per second. So it's still faster than most 9mm rounds. So even with a lower recoil load, it's really no slouch and still very effective out of a shotgun. Now, another thing about the weight in comparison, so if you've watched my previous videos, you know I also did a review on the CZ612. The CZ612 is even lighter at 5.7 pounds, so both of these are very lightweight shotguns. Now, as far as the trigger pull for me comes in at around 4 pounds, 6 ounces on my Lyman gauge. So if I run the action, it's actually a very nice trigger pull for the Mossberg and something I would definitely not modify. Now, the other thing you're going to notice on this, and it's also the same with the CZ612 and many other shotguns, is the length of pull. Now, if you're not familiar with this, the length of pull is the distance between the trigger and the buttstock. And this basically should be a distance that is comfortable for what you like to use a shotgun for. So in my case, if I'm buying a tactical or defense shotgun, I typically prefer a length of pull around 12 to 12.5 inches. If you've ever fired a tactical shotgun and trained with them and wore body armor and things of that nature, you know why a shorter length of pull is so important. And one of the easiest ways to determine the ideal length of pull, other than holding the shotgun up to you to see if it's comfortable, is to measure the distance between where your trigger finger is and then holding the shotgun in your hand with the stock along your forearm. Where does it end up at the end, or where your elbow reaches? Now, in my case, what I like to do is I like to have a shotgun that I would hold in my hand with the trigger in and be able to have a gap right here at the end between my forearm and then the back of the arm by the elbow. This is the ideal length of pull, which is why on tactical shotguns I like to have them around 12.5 inches. So if you're an average size individual or smaller or a female, this might be an issue for you. Now, here's the good news. There are many good aftermarket stock options that work on the 500 and 590s that will also work on your Maverick. My favorite, of course, is the Magpul SGA stock. And the reason why is it is not only a high quality stock, but it also allows you to shim for your desired length of pull. And those are usually the ones that I recommend if somebody's going to change out the stock on the shotgun. You'll also notice, as I mentioned before, this is an 18.5 inch basic blued barrel. There is also another version of the Mossberg Maverick with an 8-round, 20-inch barrel, so a little bit longer barrel with the tube that runs the full length, where you can get a few more rounds in. And then, as I mentioned before, this was the combination that I bought with the field barrel, which is 28-inch with vented ribs and then 2 beads on the barrel, which is actually very high quality, especially when you can change these out. And it's because all you have to do is unscrew the plug here, and then you take out the barrel and then swap out the barrel right and left. And you can literally do this within a matter of minutes. It's very easy to change these out. Now, the one thing about the Mossberg 88 when I first bought it was I noticed that the action was just a little clunky and a little stiff. So if I run the action now, it's just not as smooth as the actions that I would typically see on an 870. And some people, if you're very sensitive to how clunky these can be, you might actually prefer the 870 actions over the Mossbergs. The Mossbergs tend to be a little bit clunkier, but they do break in after a while. So one of the first things I had to do when I bought the shotgun was I disassembled the entire shotgun and gave it a thorough cleaning. And also just firing it and then cleaning it a few times will allow it to break in a while. So if you pick one of these up and you notice that the action is just a little bit stiff or a little bit clunky, and maybe it was just the one I bought, I don't know, but I've heard other people had this issue before. Take some time to break it in, and they usually break in well over time. And one of the things that you're also going to notice, especially if you're a casual shooter of shotguns, is one of the main differences between the 870s and the Mossbergs are these shell elevators. And in the case with the 870s, when you load, you have to push up the shell elevator to put in the shells. And sometimes this can be a little uncomfortable for people, as opposed to Mossbergs, where the shell elevator actually extracts, or it's up into the housing. So it makes loading much easier without having to pinch your fingers. That's why many people who fire both the 870s and the Mossbergs prefer to do the loading on the Mossbergs over the 870s. But again, that's whatever preference you wish to use. As I mentioned before, there is a safety which is basically small and in front of the trigger guard compared to traditional Mossbergs that have these tang safeties. Now, one of the things you're going to notice about this is, unlike, for example, an 870 where the safety, the manual safety, is behind the trigger, which is what I prefer. And you'll also notice on the 870 models, they also, when they're pushed, they are flush, so you can actually feel where they are at. In the case with the Mossberg Maverick, Not only is it in front of the trigger, but it's not flush when it's fully depressed. So oftentimes if you're going just on feel alone, you might not necessarily know unless you fire these a lot whether or not the safety is actually on or not. So it's just something you need to be aware of and train around when you're utilizing your Mossberg. The other advantage with, however, with having a manual safety on the trigger guard as opposed to a tank safety is if you want to change this out and run, for example, a pistol grip. If you ever put a pistol grip stock on a Mossberg, you know that it's very hard to reach the traditional tank safety, and it basically makes them almost ineffective in that regard. So if you do plan on running a pistol grip stock on your Mossberg Maverick, then having the safety here is actually an advantage. Now, the other thing you're going to notice about the 88s is they do not have a drilled and tapped receiver, which basically means you can't mount on a rail and optics like you can on, for example, the 500 and the 590s. And again, this is one of the ways that they're able to save costs when they're producing these shotguns. So if that's something that you're really looking to do, you can't do that on the Mossbergs right out of the box. So basically you're stuck with the sighting systems you have here. Now, speaking of the sighting systems, when you get the Mossberg, you're going to basically have a front bead sight, and I've got the original front bead sight right here. Now, one of the things I noticed with my front bead sight when I bought this was that when I was shooting slugs at about 25 to 50 yards, they were shooting pretty high relative to my point of aim. Usually I'd prefer to have higher post, front sight post, so I can do more Kentucky windage on that, but you're kind of limited with a very small front beaded sight. So one of the upgrades I made here was I wanted to have a higher and more visible sight post. So I installed the XS Big Dot epoxy tritium sight over the bead. So basically what it does is they give you not only the sight here, but they give you a replacement bead that you can screw in. And then, so I take out the old bead, put in the new bead, and then take JB weld and then place it on here and then let it sit for about 24 hours. And in this case, you can see it's a much better and much more pronounced front sight compared to the bead sight I had before. I also noticed my point of impact is almost perfect now when I shoot slugs out to 25 to 50 yards or beyond. So that was one of the first changes I made to the shotgun after I bought it. Now, speaking of this upgrades and changes you can make, one of the great things about the Mossberg Maverick is because it's based upon the 500 design, many of the parts that you can use on a 500 and 590 are interchangeable with the Maverick, including things like barrels, chokes, stocks, aftermarket stocks, front sights, etc. Anything that you would typically use on a 500 and 590, in many cases, those will work on your Mossberg Maverick. Now, there's a couple exceptions to this. The first one is the forend grip. The forend grip is hard to change. The reason why is the grip on a Maverick is pinned in place with the action bars. So basically this means that unlike a 500 and 590 where you can remove the action bars from the grip when changing out your foregrip, you can't do that on a Maverick. So anytime that you would want to change this out, you're going to need to change out the action bars with it, which limits what you can buy and what you can do with this. But in my opinion, you don't really need to change this out unless, for example, you want to add like a light mount onto your grip or things of that nature. But there's a workaround to that. You can always buy a tube mount instead for a light that includes sling mounts as well. So GG&G makes them, and you can even order them on Amazon.com. So that basically means you don't really have to change out the foregrip, especially if you want to add a light as an accessory onto your shotgun. Now, if you really wanted to dress up your Maverick, you could do that, as I mentioned before, with Magpul furniture. If you want to mount a rail or a red dot or new foregrips or things like that, then my opinion is spend the extra couple $100 difference and get the Model 500 to 590 instead. So the only changes that I typically recommend on a Mossberg Maverick are, the first thing is adding a shell carrier, which I do to all of the shotguns that I work with. So in this case, on the other side of the receiver here, you can notice a shell carrier, and it's Velcro. And then all you have to do is you buy these shell carriers, and then you can easily mount them to your shotgun and then rip them off and replace them anytime you want to run a different shell card or different types of shells on your shotgun. So that's the first easy change you can make that I do on all of my shotguns that I own. The second thing, as I recommended before, is adding the excess sights. So again, it's up to you. If you like the beaded sight on the shotgun, that's fine. But at least for me, I found that when I'm shooting things tactically and for accuracy, it's much better for me with the excess sight over the beads. And then the final thing is, if you really have trouble with the length of pull, as I indicated before, the 14 inches here on your arm, and you feel like you're really reaching out with the shotgun as opposed to pulling it in and being comfortable shooting it, then your length of pull is an issue. In that case, I would recommend, again, there's a lot of options out there, but the best one really is the Magpul SGA stock, because again, you can shim that, and you can get the ones that work for the Mossberg 500, 590s that will also work on your Maverick. So basically, if you want a solid starter shotgun for both defense and hunting, or a truck gun and you don't care if it gets beat up, or a home security gun that sits in your house, then it's really hard to argue against the value of the Maverick 88. These typically come at about half the cost of a 500 and 590. These are very reliable actions with decades of use and work, and they're based upon a proven Mossberg design. And normally I don't talk about prices in my videos, but in this case, you know, I spent around $250 for the combination seen here. And you would be hard pressed to find a better and more versatile value in the gun market today than you can get for $250. And that's one of the reasons why I picked this up. So if you have a chance to pick one of these up, especially at a great price, don't pass up on the chance. As you have seen from my previous videos, I love pump shotguns for their simplicity, their versatility, their various levels of lethality, and in the case of guns like the Mossberg 88, their incredible value. If you like this video or like this channel, please subscribe on YouTube, and thanks for watching.